Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. The dragon of the starry sky howled beneath the world net. Despite how powerful it was, it still felt like it was trembling on the verge of collapse. However, as it exerted control to keep its body intact, and even prepared to counterattack, Bai Xiaochun's eyes flashed, and his regenerative powers kicked in. Instead of falling back in the face of the dragon, he clenched his fist and, in completely unprecedented fashion, unleashed another Undying Emperor's fist. After mastering the Undying Blood, Bai Xiaochun could tell that his Undying Emperor's fist was not limited in the way it had been in the past. Thanks to his regenerative powers, he could unleash it over and over again. 3 punches, 4 punches, 5 punches. A series of 5 domineering fist strikes was more than the dragon of the starry sky could take, and its entire 300,000-meter body exploded, sending a blast of energy raging onto Bai Xiaochun. The force of the detonation shocked even the giant Ghost King, who considered trying to interfere, but couldn't react quickly enough. This was one of Patriarch Starry Sky's trump cards, something he had planned to use on the giant Ghost King, but was now forced to use on the troublesome Bai Xiaochun. From a distance, it was possible to see that the detonation of the dragon of the starry sky created a massive vortex, almost like an enormous mouth that loomed over Bai Xiaochun to swallow him up. The destructive power of that vortex would be shocking to even a demigod, much less any cultivator under that level. The disciples of the river-defying sect were getting very anxious. Song Junwan's face was ashen, and she trembled in fear and disbelief. Patriarch Spirit Stream panted as he stared nervously at the huge vortex. However, even as everyone watched in anxiety and anticipation, Bai Xiaochun's voice rang out from inside of the vortex. "That's all you've got?" he said, striding out into the open. His hair was in complete disarray, and he was seriously injured. However, with each step he took, his aura grew stronger, and his wounds healed. By the time he emerged fully from within the vortex, he wasn't harmed at all, and his aura was all the way back at its peak. "Impossible," Patriarch Starry Sky gasped, staggering backward in complete disbelief. He could accept that his spear of the starry sky had been defeated. And he could even handle the destruction of his dragon of the starry sky. But the fact that even the detonation of that dragon hadn't killed Bai Xiaochun was something that seemed to defy all reality. He didn't even look like he had been hurt. Patriarch Starry Sky's scalp tingled in fear, and his heart pounded in terror. He finally had to admit that this was an enemy he couldn't defeat. Even worse, he was finally coming to the realization that Bai Xiaochun might actually be able to beat him into submission. This guy can recover from any injury. None of my divine abilities can do anything to him. I guess I've lost the initiative, which means that the next thing which will happen is, he'll attack me. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Patriarch Starry Sky's eyes began to shine with terror and fear. All of a sudden, he thought back to a powerful expert from years past, a person who all of the demigods in the lands of Heavenspan had feared. That person was very much like this Bai Xiaochun, a person with terrifying regenerative capabilities. The famed blood ancestor, Patriarch Starry Sky murmured. He could well imagine that, with regenerative abilities like this, Bai Xiaochun wouldn't necessarily be invincible in this heaven and earth. However, the only people who could possibly be a match for him would be the Celestial or the Gravekeeper. No demigods could possibly qualify to tangle with Bai Xiaochun, not even the most experienced and qualified of them. In fact, it wouldn't even be a certainty that demigods could team up to defeat him. The only way to beat him would be to defeat his regenerative powers, or handle him like the blood ancestor. Have the Celestial crush him, pierce through the power of his undying body to directly slaughter his nascent divinity. The giant Ghost King was reacting similarly, and simply couldn't control his facial expression. Bai Xiaochun's powers of regeneration surpassed all imagination, and left the giant Ghost King completely aghast. Furthermore, if Patriarch Starry Sky suddenly thought about the blood ancestor, then it made even more sense for the giant Ghost King, one of the 4 heavenly kings of the Arch-Emperor dynasty, to think of exactly the same thing. Years ago, the blood ancestor had vied for the throne with one of the Arch-Emperors, but had eventually ended up dying in the lands of Heavenspan. Bai Xiaochun could see how shocked the 2 demigods were. Taking a deep breath, he looked at Patriarch Starry Sky and said, "Any more divine abilities you want to try out? If not, then I guess I'll take my turn." "Oh, yes, I have more," Patriarch Starry Sky said, his eyes bloodshot. Suddenly, he reached up and touched his forehead, causing his divine soul to fly out into the open and shoot up into the starry sky above. As his divine soul merged with the starry sky, starlight that was even more blinding than anything before began to shine down. This is my most powerful divine ability, Bai Xiaochun. Let's see if your regeneration powers can save you from this. In the blink of an eye, Patriarch Starry Sky began to descend in the form of a starry sky. It was as if the heavens were embodied and falling down toward the earth. Most powerful divine ability, huh? All of a sudden, the desire to do battle surged strong in Bai Xiaochun. His previous 2 clashes with Patriarch Starry Sky had been defensive in nature. He hadn't even tried to unleash a counterattack. But now, he was done holding out. Without any hesitation, he shot up to meet the descending starry sky. Shouting, he used the mountain-shaking bash and the undying hex to pick up speed. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the power of countless heavenly bodies came to focus on Bai Xiaochun. He was shaking on the verge of collapse, and yet, after only a breath of time passed, was fully recovered. And that was when he unleashed his undying Emperor's Fist. If 1 fist didn't work, he would use 10. If 10 failed, he would use 100. Then 1,000. Then 10,000. You will be destroyed, he shouted. Fist after fist struck, causing the starry sky to tremble violently. Inside, Patriarch Starry Sky's divine soul was rapidly reaching a point of instability. Gritting his teeth, he rotated his cultivation base to try to hang on, causing destructive power to surge out to meet Bai Xiaochun. However, no matter how badly Bai Xiaochun was injured, his undying blood made him terrifyingly resilient. He quickly recovered from any injury, and his aura always returned to the peak. He seemed completely indomitable, utterly domineering. Everyone watching the scene was dumbstruck. The giant ghost king's jaw hung open, and Patriarch Starry Sky was as shocked as if the heavens had collapsed. Finally, the starry sky shattered. The stars exploded, and Patriarch Starry Sky's divine soul fled out into the open, terrified. Bai Xiaochun also appeared, moving so quickly that he transformed into a series of afterimages that headed directly toward Patriarch Starry Sky's divine soul. His goal was not to kill him, but to beat him into submission. Patriarch Starry Sky looked over at Bai Xiaochun, who seemed to be clad in world raiment, with his will having surpassed the will of the world itself. He seemed impossible to defend against, to the degree that Patriarch Starry Sky's battle spirit immediately vanished. As of this moment, he truly feared Bai Xiaochun. Fine, I agree. It's too tiring fighting you. Truce. A truce. No fighting. Patriarch Starry Sky couldn't help but feel a bit depressed about the situation. After all, under normal circumstances, Bai Xiaochun would be so far beneath him that he would likely be able to kill him, given enough time. But these were not normal circumstances. Bai Xiaochun's terrifying powers of regeneration essentially negated any injuries. And although his divine abilities and magical techniques were not impossible to defend against, getting hit with them over and over again was profoundly frustrating. Fighting with him isn't worth it. You can't even hurt him. Patriarch Starry Sky sighed, fairly certain of how the fight would end if it continued to play out. With that, he flickered into motion, falling back a bit while his divine soul returned to his body. Clearly, he was agreeing to a ceasefire while here outside of Giant Ghost City. When Bai Xiaochun saw that, he sighed, and then looked over at the Giant Ghost King. Now it's your turn, Giant Ghost, old pal. The Giant Ghost King smiled wryly and shook his head, feeling very much the way that Patriarch Starry Sky did. No, I'll do whatever you say. A ceasefire it is. With the 2 demigods having made their decision clear, the cultivators on the battlefield began to back away from each other, mixed emotions on their faces. The cultivators from the river-defying sect likewise stood down. As for the disciples from the spirit and bloodstream divisions, they couldn't help but think back to how Bai Xiaochun had single-handedly stopped a battle between their sects all those years ago. But can he really stop this war? Patriarch Spirit Stream thought. When Bai Xiaochun saw the 2 sides backing away from each other, he sighed in relief. At the same time, the hope in his heart grew stronger. Stopping this battle is only the first step. The next thing I need to do is go talk to the Gravekeeper. Having reached this point in his train of thought, he turned to leave. However, it was at that point that the entire world shuddered, and massive pressure suddenly began to weigh down on the entire area. The cultivators from both sides of the conflict were all shocked. Everyone, including the Giant Ghost King and Patriarch Starry Sky, all looked up into the sky. There, high above everyone's heads, was a gigantic eye. The enormous eye was looking down at the battlefield, and specifically, at Bai Xiaochun. The presence of the eye made the pressure weighing down seem even more intense. All of a sudden, the countless cultivators down below began to tremble, and felt terror rising up from within their very souls. In fact, they were so shaken that their minds went completely blank. It was as if the entire world had gone still and ceased to exist. The only thing that existed was that gigantic eye. The gaze of the eye was cold to the extreme, like the biting, freezing iciness of winter. It was a gaze that could pierce through anything, and could see into the hearts and minds of everyone, even the devas. The powerful giant ghost king was actually panting as a result of the eye. The celestial, he murmured, backing up, a look of madness appearing in his eyes. He rotated his cultivation base immediately, as though the gaze of that eye put him in such unprecedented danger that he instinctively had to protect himself from it. Patriarch Starry Sky was shaking visibly, but in contrast to the giant ghost king, he immediately bowed formally to the eye. Bai Xiaochun looked up, his aura already unstable, his entire person trembling in terror. He could already tell that the celestial was more powerful than the last time he had seen him in the north. Although he still was not back to the level he had been when he had fought the gravekeeper, he was close. Clearly, acquiring the clone of the laughing, crying ghost face had been of great benefit to his recovery. Well met, Celestial. Bai Xiaochun felt as if the Celestial could see every aspect of him, inside and out. Thankfully, he wore the world raiment, and thus somehow had a bit of the will of the world with him. Because of that, he was able to resist the assault of the gaze to some degree. Clasping hands respectfully, he bowed. In response to his bow, the gaze of the Celestial suddenly changed. Instead of being ice-cold, it became warm in a way that Bai Xiaochun had never experienced before. Bai Xiaochun. When the Celestial spoke, his voice contained something encouraging, as well as other mixed emotions. Not only could Bai Xiaochun detect those mixed emotions, but the others in the area could as well. Far away from Giant Ghost City, in the middle of the Heavenspan Sea, right on Heavenspan Island, there at the peak of the mountain, in the palace of the Tao, the sound of heavy breathing could be heard. Also, two eyes lit up with the brightness of suns. The aura of the entire world seemed to tremble as those eyes looked out, and waves began to surge on the surface of the Heavenspan Sea. So, he's appeared. Of all the times to show up, he picks now. The Celestial sat cross-legged in the palace of the Tao, a blood-colored flag stretched out in front of him, within which was the sealed soul clone of the ghost face. The laughing, crying appearance of the face inside the flag was bizarre, to say the least. So those fluctuations I sensed really did indicate that someone mastered the Undying Codex. This Bai Xiaochun actually did it. He's ready. I don't need to push him anymore. He's truly ready, even before I've made my final decision. It seems that when he went missing, he must have gone into hiding somewhere in the north. And that apprentice of mine is not dead after all, although that's not important now. I really don't want to take that final step. She's my only flesh and blood, after all. Looking torn, the Celestial cast his gaze out of the palace of the Tao in the direction of one of the other mountain peaks on Heavenspan Island. Standing there was Du Lingfei, who seemed so forlorn that she was like a mere husk of her old self, as if her divine soul was dead, and only her physical body remained. The war is nearing its end, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to open the world gate. After that damned gravekeeper perishes, will I be able to open the door on my own? Or will it remain closed for all eternity because of his departure? There's no way to tell ahead of time. Perhaps this really is my last chance, and my best possibility to succeed, an opportunity just waiting to be taken advantage of. After a long moment passed, the Celestial's eyes turned as red as blood, and his expression twisted ferociously. I have to get out of here. Even if the price were higher, I would still pay it. Considering my talents and qualifications, if I were in the world beyond, I could easily make another breakthrough. Then I would reach the true Mahayana realm. In fact, the Archean realm might not even be impossible to reach. And my current longevity can no longer be increased by the use of longevity pills. His expression twisted into an even more ferocious display of determination and madness. Having made his decision, he rose to his feet. You're forcing me to do this, Gravekeeper. He threw his head back and roared, causing the entire world to tremble. The waves on the Heavenspan Sea reached frightening heights. As for Du Lingfei, she shivered, and tears began to stream down her face. If one looked closely, it would be possible to see two magical symbols hovering deep within her vacant eyes. Xiaochun, I'm sorry, she murmured, her face as pale as death as tears streamed down her cheeks. In that moment, the Celestial reached out in the direction of Giant Ghost City and made a grasping motion. A massive vortex sprang into being, with one side on Heavenspan Island, and the other in the air above Giant Ghost City. What had once appeared to be the eye of the Celestial transformed into that other vortex, which span furiously as a huge hand reached out of it toward Bai Xiaochun. The celestial's hand was descending from the heavens. It seemed to supplant all creation, as though the only things in existence were that vortex, and that hand, which thrummed with enough power to destroy the world. The hand grew larger and larger, until it seemed that it would surpass the vortex. The lands quaked from the pressure, and crevices began to open up everywhere. It was even possible to see the fingerprints on the hands, which were almost like enormous mountains and valleys, all of which threatened to crush the world. Intense fluctuations spread out in all directions, causing all the cultivators to be so shocked that they could do nothing other than stare blankly. It wasn't just the people near Giant Ghost City who could see this amazing scene. In the cities belonging to the three other heavenly kings, cultivators on all sides of the conflict could see what was happening. Although the vortex and the hand were not large enough to cover all of the wildlands, they were large enough to cover nearly 70% of it. It was truly an astonishing sight. What is that? Heavens! That's a huge hand. The celestial. It's definitely the celestial. Cries of alarm rose up from both wildlanders and heavenspan cultivators alike. However, it only took a moment for the heavenspan cultivators to start getting excited. The celestial is making a move. We're definitely going to win the war. As such cries rang out, the soul cultivators and savage giants suddenly looked profoundly worried. In fact, their eyes began to glitter with despair. The Nine Serenities King, War Champion King, and even Shushan's father, the Spirit Advent King, were all deeply shocked. As for their opponents, the demigod patriarchs from the other three river source sects, they couldn't control their reactions. That's the direction of Giant Ghost City. What's happening in Giant Ghost City? Something strange is going on. Virtually everyone in the wildlands was completely focused on that enormous hand emerging from the vortex. A very serious expression could be seen on the face of the Grand Heaven Master as he stared out of Archemperor City and up into the sky. As for the reigning Archemperor, he stood in the Imperial Palace, eyes flickering with intense hatred. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun hovered in the air above Giant Ghost City, hardly able to breathe as he stared up at the vortex and the hand. Already, a sense of deep foreboding filled him. As that sensation grew more and more intense, it reached the point where he was sure something catastrophic was about to happen. The celestial is going to attack me. Bai Xiaochun had no time to try to figure out why the celestial would do such a thing. Without any hesitation, he prepared to flee. However, the hand was too big. It was far larger than Patriarch Starry Sky's magic of the Starry Sky. After all, that Starry Sky was a Taoist magic, whereas the celestial's hand contained the power of the world itself. Even as Bai Xiaochun prepared to flee, the hand began to close in on him. Clearly, it didn't matter where in the world he went, that hand would catch him. A look of shock could be seen on the Giant Ghost King's face, and Patriarch Starry Sky was stunned. By now, both of them could tell that the celestial's hand was going after Bai Xiaochun. The Blood Ancestor. All of a sudden, both of them thought back to what the celestial had done to the Blood Ancestor years ago. Of the two demigods, the Giant Ghost King reacted the most dramatically. "Get to Archemperor City," he shouted. "The celestial is going to try to kill you." Bitterness gripped Bai Xiaochun's heart as he thought about how he had never done anything to offend the celestial too badly. Furthermore, he was in a relationship with his daughter, Du Lingfei. He just wanted to stop this war, and had been just getting ready to go talk to the Gravekeeper about opening the World Gate to let the celestial leave. Although he had made an agreement with the frigid matriarch, Bai Xiaochun had pointed out from the beginning that he didn't have any beef with the celestial, and therefore wouldn't take the initiative to try to kill him. He didn't like fighting and killing. He only wanted to figure out a way to resolve all of the issues everyone had with each other. He wants to kill me. However, despite his bitterness, he wasn't very surprised. It was as if, based on all his experiences, he had somehow been prepared for this on a very deep level. Whether it was his relationship with the Gravekeeper and Bai Hao, or the matters pertaining to the world treasure and the frigid matriarch, the celestial had plenty of reasons to want to attack him. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the hand got closer and closer, filling the sky. In turn, Bai Xiaochun fled, although it didn't seem to do him any good. In that critical moment, he drew upon the full power of the cloud-lighting forefather transformation. "Damn you, Celestial," he howled. Aware that fleeing would do no good, he decided to do the only thing possible: fight back. Meanwhile, in the most ultimate reserve power of the Archemperor dynasty, the magical treasure that was Archemperor City, deep in the third subterranean level of the city. Within the ruins, in a place that had been buried ever since the original war between the Heavenspan region and the Archemperor dynasty, there was a crumbling pagoda. Inside of that pagoda sat an old man. He wore a long black robe, and had hair so white and old that it emanated an aura of decay. His face was crisscrossed with wrinkles, and he emanated a powerful aura of death. Were it not for the fact that his eyes were open and glittering dully, he could easily be mistaken for a corpse. However, despite the glittering of his eyes, he still seemed like he was mostly dead, an oil lamp just on the verge of winking out. He might be able to survive for a bit longer, but soon would return to dust. He was none other than the Gravekeeper. He had lived for many, many years, as if he had been born along with the very world in which he lived. He had seen many changes throughout his life, and had seen many generations come and go. Generations were born, and generations died, but he remained. It was an enormous weight to bear. In his spectacular battle with the Celestial and Ghost Mother's soul clone, heaven and earth had been significantly damaged. He had used his magic of the 5 yin organs, calling up metal, wood, water, fire, and earth in a way that weakened him even more than he already had been. Afterward, he had passed his title on to Bai Hao. At the moment, he only had a tiny bit of energy left. Energy which might vanish at any moment. In fact, he couldn't even move. He could only sit there cross-legged. That was the reason why he hadn't appeared during the true battle between the Celestial and Ghost Mother on the Ghost Galleon. It wasn't that he didn't want to, he simply couldn't. However, in the moment that the Celestial made his move in the Wildlands, the decrepit Gravekeeper took a breath. Then he slowly looked up. It seemed to take profound effort, but as he did, his eyes began to shine with increasingly bright light. He was like kindling that had been sparked into flame. His lips twitched as though he were speaking, although no words could be heard. Back outside of Giant Ghost City, the Celestial's hand continued on toward Bai Xiaochun, who was struggling to fight back. But then, the lands shook, and powerful fluctuations spilled out everywhere as the earth broke apart, revealing an enormous hand that reached upward. This new hand seemed comparable to the Celestial's hand in all ways. As the lands collapsed, the hand shot up and slammed into the Celestial's hand. The wild lands shook violently as a huge boom echoed out. A massive shockwave rippled out into all the cultivators watching the event. Thankfully, the demigods and devas were there to absorb some of the energy, otherwise all of the other cultivators would have been either seriously injured or killed. Gravekeeper, you old bastard, Celestial. 2 voices filled all creation, one shaking with rage, the other quivering with extreme weariness. As the 2 voices echoed out through heaven and earth, it felt very much like the last time the Celestial and the Gravekeeper had fought each other. And this time, they were fighting a battle the likes of which could end the world. The Celestial was returning to the Wildlands in much different circumstances than when he had left. He had recovered from his injuries. Furthermore, the Gravekeeper was now extremely exhausted. However, despite how weak he was still the Gravekeeper. As the enormous hand stretched up from the earth and slammed into the Celestial's hand, a massive shockwave rippled out. The sky went dark, and tempests screamed across the lands. Yet again, a certain limit of power was reached, and the protective world net appeared up above. As the net appeared to fill the sky, Bai Xiaochun's expression flickered. He could clearly sense that because of everything that the world net had experienced throughout the years, it was weakening in many places. Because of the explosive power being unleashed by the Gravekeeper and the Celestial, the only people who could remain in the area were Bai Xiaochun, the Giant Ghost King, and Patriarch Starry Sky. Only those 3 could bear witness to the shocking spectacle of the Celestial and the Gravekeeper fighting. However, Bai Xiaochun didn't wish to remain behind. He actually borrowed the momentum of the blast to fall back. The Celestial's hand shifted as if to follow him, but the Gravekeeper's hand moved to intercept it again. The cultivation base power backing those 2 gargantuan hands vastly surpassed the demigod realm. They were in the Mahayana realm, which was also referred to by some as the Celestial realm. Years ago, Ghost Mother had mentioned that Taoist Heavenspan called himself the Celestial, but was in fact only a quasi-celestial. Even still, he could unleash power that could change the face of heaven and earth. Therefore, not only did Bai Xiaochun attempt to flee the area, but the Giant Ghost King and Patriarch Starry Sky also began to back away. They could all tell that the Gravekeeper was on his last legs, and wouldn't be able to hold out for very much longer. Patriarch Starry Sky hesitated for a moment as he considered whether or not to stop Bai Xiaochun from fleeing. However, considering how the Giant Ghost King was glowering at him, he simply sighed and decided not to make things complicated. After all, even he was a bit frightened by the sudden and unexpected appearance of the Celestial. You are weak, Gravekeeper, the Celestial said, his voice laced with arrogance. You should be in the underworld river, waiting to die. How dare you show up here and try to interfere with my plans? The golden light of Heavenspan river water shone out in all directions as the Celestial's hand once again shot toward the Gravekeeper's hand. As the resulting boom echoed out, and Bai Xiaochun accelerated in the opposite direction, a fourth boom could be heard. Looking over his shoulder, he was shocked to see that the earthly hand of the gravekeeper was collapsing into pieces. As for the celestial's golden hand, it once again filled all heaven and earth as it headed toward Bai Xiaochun. You can't escape, Bai Xiaochun. The gravekeeper is forcing me to do this. It is not my wish, but I have no choice. Therefore, you will submit, and become the medicinal pill I need. Bai Xiaochun knew that he couldn't escape, and as he stared back at the celestial's enormous hand, he had no time to think of anything other than fight. Godkiller. Eyes bloodshot, he called upon the trump card that came with his undying blood. Now that he had mastered the Undying Codex, he could control the Godkiller technique, and would not lose consciousness when using it. As blood chi surged in his body, and he accelerated rapidly, the celestial laughed coldly. The Arch-Ancestor's secret Undying Codex. If you had the Live Forever Codex, then not even I would be able to fight you. But without it, you have no way of escaping the destiny I have prepared for you. The enormous hand formed from heaven-span seawater sent golden light shining out that suppressed Bai Xiaochun's blood chi and completely ignored the Godkiller technique. Damn you, Celestial! Bai Xiaochun howled, throwing his hands out in front of him. Instantly, water vapor erupted out in all directions, turning the area into a huge swamp. Suddenly, a howl erupted into the air that seemed to come from the ancient past, a howl that combined with Bai Xiaochun's shout to shake everything in the area. Curved mountain peaks rose up from that swamp, the manifestation of none other than the Water Swamp Kingdom. Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base now was in the great circle of the Diva realm, which meant that his Water Swamp Kingdom was vastly more powerful than before. As the mountain peaks arced through the air, a huge beast hand appeared in full, rushing to meet the golden hand of the Celestial. Unfortunately, the fact that Bai Xiaochun was a diva meant that he was vastly below the Celestial. When the Water Swamp Kingdom met the Celestial's hand, a huge boom echoed out. The Celestial snorted coldly, and the beast hand shattered. A howl of pain and rage erupted out from the watery swamp, which roiled violently, as if the creature inside wished to free itself. But the Celestial's hand was too powerful. Thrumming with energy, it continued onward toward Bai Xiaochun. Soon, the entire 5,000-kilometer area around Bai Xiaochun was nothing more than that hand, closing around him. The air shattered as though it were corporeal, causing cracking sounds to echo out. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun's vision was obscured, allowing him to see only the 5 mountain-like fingers surrounding him. Compared to the size of that hand, he was like nothing more than a bug. If the world were likened to a sea, then the Celestial's hand would be reaching down into that water to pick up the tiny shrimp larva that was Bai Xiaochun. There was literally nothing he could do to fight back or resist. Blood sprayed out of his mouth because of the intense pressure weighing down on him, and cracking sounds rang out as his bones began to shatter. The watery swamp around him was thoroughly defeated by the golden hand, and simply collapsed. There was simply no way for Bai Xiaochun to escape, and as such, a feeling of despair began to grip his heart. However, even as the hand closed in around him, black water suddenly appeared out of nowhere. In the blink of an eye, it created a shocking underworld river. A stream of energy erupted from the river, wrapping around Bai Xiaochun as if to take him away. The new Hell Emperor, the Celestial said. If you had 10,000 years to prepare, you might qualify to face me, but right now, you're simply courting death. The heaven-span seawater that made up the enormous hand exploded, creating a powerful attack that slammed into the underworld river and crushed it. Bai Xiaochun could even hear a muffled cry of anguish and pain from Bai Hao. However, in the blink of an eye, the heaven-span seawater overwhelmed the underworld river water and drove it away. The only thing left was the Celestial's huge hand, closing in around Bai Xiaochun. As it closed into a fist, it seemed prepared to crush anything within its grasp out of existence. In that moment, Bai Xiaochun went mad. Although he was already grievously injured, his powers of regeneration defied imagination. Without any hesitation, he resorted to the Cloud Lightning Forefather transformation. 11th transformation. As he grew larger, rocks began to fly toward him as he used the Living Mountain incantation. His fleshly body power skyrocketed, combining with his cultivation base to somehow manage to keep him going. However, he couldn't hold on for very long. A moment later, his Forefather transformation and Living Mountain incantation collapsed, and he was badly injured. With his regeneration powers, he recovered, but in a moment was back to being injured. It was a seemingly endless cycle. In the briefest of moments, he went back and forth from being injured to his peak state about 100 times. And there seemed to be no end in sight. The Undying Codex truly is extraordinary. When the Celestial saw how Bai Xiaochun was able to fight back against someone vastly more powerful than himself, and consistently regenerate despite his injuries, he was quite moved. Thankfully, this isn't my first time encountering someone who has mastered the Undying Codex. Back on Heavenspan Island, the Celestial's eyes suddenly flickered with a crystalline glow. As he did, Du Lingfei shivered. Even as she stood there, as mute and numb as the walking dead, a crystalline light suddenly shot out from the depths of her eyes, and the two bizarre magical symbols that existed there. There was a strange power inside of her that the Celestial seemed capable of drawing upon because of those magical symbols. Back outside of Giant Ghost City, as his hand remained closed around Bai Xiaochun, a crystalline glow suddenly appeared. In the blink of an eye, the entire hand turned crystal, and then crushed down harder. Rumbling sounds echoed out as Bai Xiaochun, his hair wild and disheveled, called out to the world treasure of the north. Unfortunately, the frigid matriarch was still sleeping, and didn't respond. Worse, it seemed that because of the incredible pressure weighing down on him, his regenerative powers were faltering. Whatever magical technique was involved with this crystal seemed to be at complete odds with the Undying Codex. Without his regenerative powers working fully, Bai Xiaochun couldn't stand up to the raw power of the Celestial. A popping sound rang out, and he was crushed. At that point, he couldn't remain conscious, and passed out. The Celestial began to slowly retract his hand. As it headed back toward the vortex, everyone in the area looked on, completely shaken. Devas and demigods alike were completely floored. Everyone from the river-defying sect was trembling, and many of them had their hands clenched tightly into fists at their sides. Song Junwan's face was wet with tears, and yet there was nothing she could do except watch while everything happened. When the vortex disappeared, she coughed up a mouthful of blood and then toppled forward, unconscious. As the Celestial's hand vanished, his voice rang out to fill the wild lands, cold and emotionless in all aspects. All Heavenspan cultivators are to join forces, and exterminate every living thing in the wildlands. The Celestial did not like being in a passive position. He preferred to be in control. That much was possible to see from how things had played out with the Bone Galleon. This current matter was playing out exactly the same. All of his hopes were wrapped up with Bai Xiaochun, and although he was only about 80% confident in being able to succeed, that didn't mean he would let his guard down. Since there were still two paths available, he would leave both open to pick from. If neither path works, then since my longevity is running out, I will just bury this world along with me. With that, his hand vanished completely. The cultivators from the Heavenspan region were shaken. However, no matter how tired they were from all the fighting, they had to follow the orders of the Celestial. And of course, there were some who were very enthusiastic about following such orders, and immediately began to fight with murderous fervor. The morale of the Wildlanders had suffered a severe blow upon the defeat of the Gravekeeper. From what they could tell, there was absolutely no way out for them now. The lands of Heavenspan would accept no captives. The Celestial wanted everything in the Wildlands dead, all the way down to the grass and the roots. Savages and soul cultivators alike, even the animals, would all be killed. The only choice the Wildlanders had now was to fight to the death. The sound of battle resumed, accompanied by bitter chuckling, roaring laughter, and the sounds of self-detonation. Blood once again began to stain the ground, and the death count rose. It seemed as if the end of days had come. The sky was dark, and the lands were shattered. It wouldn't take long before Giant Ghost City fell, as well as the other three kingly cities. When that happened, the Wildlanders would be forced to retreat, all the way to Archemperor City. Far beneath the surface of Heavenspan Island was an enormous necropolis. In the depths of the necropolis was a pool of black liquid surrounded by a huge spell formation, fully 30,000 meters from side to side. It was a spell formation created, not by spirit stones but by human bones. Some of the bones were golden, and some were crystalline, and despite being dead, all of them seemed to radiate an air of holiness. Around the perimeter of the pool of liquid were 3 deep pits, each of which contained a skeleton. Shockingly, all of those skeletons were partially gold and partially crystal. Although none were perfectly fused together, the pressure they emitted was enough to cause even demigods to tremble. That pressure was extremely close to the level of the quasi-celestial Taoist Heavenspan. Although none of them were quite as powerful as him, all of them were only about half a step from being in the true Mahayana realm. If the reigning Archemperor were able to see this place, he would instinctively recognize who those 3 corpses were. They were the remains of the 3 most powerful arch-emperors of the past. Clearly, the Celestial had located their sepulchres and exhumed their skeletons, then used them to create the most ultimate of spell formations. The rotting, holy bones had been collected throughout the years from people who had cultivated either the Undying Codex or the Live Forever Codex. In the very middle of the spell formation, within the black pool of water, Bai Xiaochun sat cross-legged, his eyes closed. He was breathing, but not conscious. The water swirled slowly around him, rippling as magical symbols slowly floated about within. The magical symbols almost seemed alive, and many of them would crawl up onto Bai Xiaochun and move around on the surface of his body. It was a very ghastly scene, made even worse by the flickering lamps which lit the area. All of a sudden, Bai Xiaochun shivered, and then opened his eyes. As soon as he did, the magical symbols that had been crawling all over him flew back into the water, apparently having been startled. At first, his expression was blank. However, as he breathed, his eyes began to glitter. Then he looked around at the pool of water and the bones that made up the spell formation. He wanted to rise to his feet, but soon found that he couldn't control his own body. It was impossible for him to leave the pool of water. Apparently, the energy of the Undying Codex and Live Forever Codex in the bones around him created an aura that disturbed his mind. At that point, a raspy voice filled the air. Don't struggle. This pool of water is made from the blood of countless descendants of the Arch-Emperor, back when I drove his dynasty out of the lands of Heavenspan. It's been fermenting here for many, many years. Bai Xiaochun then saw the air up ahead ripple, and the celestial walked slowly out into the open. The celestial's eyes burned with excitement and anticipation as he looked at Bai Xiaochun, as if he were some consummately important medicinal pill to be consumed. Panting, Bai Xiaochun looked at the celestial, his heart pounding with foreboding. Just when he was about to say something, the celestial looked around at the bones and kept talking. I killed many of these people myself in the final battle at Arch-Emperor City. And some are cultivators I ran tests on after I started researching the Undying Live Forever technique. Sadly, despite the fact that the Undying Live Forever technique is something that anyone can cultivate, for some reason, I am not able to. Perhaps it's because I've killed so many people with the blood of the Arch-Emperor in them. I can only research it by having other people cultivate the technique. I even exhumed the corpses of these 3 Arch-Emperors, and brought their skeletons here to learn a thing or two from them. You see, I stole the Live Forever Codex from the Arch-Emperor dynasty. And as for the Undying Codex, the Gravekeeper made it public for some reason. Perhaps it was an attempt to resist me, or perhaps an attempt to continue the line of the Arch-Emperor dynasty. In any case, I added fuel to the fire by making sure the Undying Codex was available in the lands of Heavenspan as well. The trickiest thing was the Live Forever Codex. It is very, very difficult to cultivate. In fact, few people have ever managed to master it. Most would fail along the way, after which I would place their remains in here to make the best use of them. Over all the years, only 2 people have ever completely cultivated it. One of them was an apprentice of mine, and the other is my daughter. By this point, the Celestial didn't really seem to be talking to Bai Xiaochun, but rather, muttering to himself. As Bai Xiaochun listened, his shock mounted until he felt like his head was being struck by lightning. After seeing Du Lingfei's bones years ago, he had already begun to suspect the truth. But to hear the Celestial say it out loud was a different matter. Sadly, I wasn't quite prepared last time. Furthermore, my apprentice discovered what was going on. Therefore, my first attempt to concoct an Undying Live Forever pill was a failure before I even started. But that doesn't matter. I have a second chance now. With that, he turned to look at Bai Xiaochun with glittering eyes. Fair, he said. At that point, Du Lingfei stepped out from behind the Celestial. Upon seeing Du Lingfei, a bitter smile spread out across Bai Xiaochun's face. He understood. He understood everything. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.